Speak for yourself.
Okay.
I'm going to use you anyway, just in case if anybody has difficulty hearing, just let us know, and we'll use the mics. So it's my pleasure, everyone, to introduce a dear good friend, fellow artist, Patricia Dubroof. I have known Patricia since, oh gosh, the early 1980s when we were causing good trouble downtown in a project called the Shadow Project that memorialized the Hiroshima bombing. And our paths have crossed in many ways, and I know her to be an amazing artist, organizer, and she has been a creative, devoted, tireless advocate of seniors and senior creativity. And she moderates a deaf cafe. If you've never been to a deaf cafe, it's super interesting, and it's not a downer. It's really engaging and enlivening, surprisingly so. Patricia's is on Zoom, so I'm sure she'll be happy to share that information with you. It's a monthly. And at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Patricia, and she's going to introduce our other panelists. This is how words and rituals help us deal with.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Wow. I'd like to thank, first of all, Nicole for inviting me to head up this panel. My life has taken this path from creativity to creativity and aging, and now creativity, aging, and end of life. So it's just moving in that direction. Not sure why I'm on that river, but here we go. So if you have questions that you want to add to the discussion, I think we're all open to that. We'll just we'll sort of start it off and then see where it goes from there. I wanted to say that the intersection of art and healing is obviously deeply felt in this amazing script. So bravo to you. The fact that we can actually have a dialogue about difficult things. Some of the words make you cringe, some of them make you laugh. This is a hugely creative practice, bringing together a show and putting it on for the public. Huge, so bravo. I've been in this field of arts and healing for over 35 years, and back when the concept of a dose of art a day was a new and exciting concept, we now know from research that art does make you feel better. It can improve your mental and physical well-being, which is why we come to theater, right? We're willing to spend 2 hours, imagine that, sitting and listening to other people tell a story. And it's those stories that can help us heal, that can help our brains expand, it helps the gray matter broaden, and can bring us peace. So not just Miss America can bring us peace. Today's panel will focus on intentional healing through ritual and grief. And let me introduce our panelists. So Anne, who's sitting next to me, alphabetically, is leader emerita. I really want to know what that means. Retired clergy leader of the New York Society for Ethical Culture and former Humanist chaplain on the campus of Columbia University and New York University. So she's an academician. She is the co-chair of the Encampment for Citizenship, the vice president of the Brooklyn Society for Ethical Culture, a board member of the Ethical Culture Fieldstone Schools, and a member of the American Humanist Association Education Advisory Committee. She holds a Doctor of Ministry degree from Hebrew Union College and a master's degree in German from SUNY Albany and business admin from NYU, because she can. So hats off to you. How she got started, she didn't mention, so maybe we'll find that out. And Valerie Walker is an end-of-life doula. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that phrase, we're going to talk a little more about what a death doula or an end-of-life doula is about. She's also an advanced care planning trainer, very important work. Professional speaker, community educator, and ambassador whose passion is quickly experienced when she speaks about the importance of planning for a quality of life at end of life. Think about it. You can plan your end of life. You may not have an off button, but you can certainly plan. She educates families on the significance of advanced care and end-of-life planning to achieve comfort and peace at end of life. So I think, obviously we've seen one story today, and many, many cultures have many different stories that could be told similarly. I'm sure there are mothers and daughters around the world in different cultures completely that would be having the same argument of faith, right? Whether it's in a Christian tradition or a Muslim tradition or a Jewish tradition or Baha'i or whatever other millions of cultures are out there. I think what's important is that we're actually able to talk about it. So what I'd like to do is hear from Anne and Valerie about why we generally, if you have opinions, and these are all just our own opinions, so I'll put that out there, but why we generally avoid talking as a culture here in America about death and about grief. And what would you say to that?
Oh, wait, we have three. Oh, we don't like, we do.
Oh, okay.
But it's not on.
Okay.
Unless there's a button I need to push. It's not.
Okay, thank you.
So could you repeat the question? Why
Sure.
as a culture are we really?
Why, as a culture, are we not
Okay.
comfortable talking
Right.
about this?
That's a great question. I'm not sure what the answer is. I just wanted to know what Leader Emerita was. So I just say I'm not an academician. I am clergy, trained as clergy, and served as a congregational leader at the New York Society. I'm retired. That's what Emerita means. Emeritus for male, Emerita for female. And I was also chaplain at 2 universities. So I think there's a reluctance in Western culture because we're just like so, instead of humans being like humans doing, we always have to do something and accomplish something and say who we are, like that exchange in the play. And thank you so much, Crystal. What a humanist play that was, and what a humanist memorial service. I mean, it was exactly the kind of thing that I would officiate at as a humanist chaplain. But that notion of identity, who are you, and putting who you are in order. I think a lot of it has to do with our needing to identify ourselves by what we do. And so I think that's where we are. That's kind of the language that we speak in Western culture. Whether you're at a party and you say, hello, my name is, and what you do, rather than kind of settling into who am I in relationship with other people. And I like the way, again, in that scene, identifying as a mother, that you're always a mother, even when your child has died, and that you choose to be in a marriage with somebody, so it's relational. So I think that the younger generation is getting a lot better at that, and so I do have a lot of hope that we can move from not so much who I am defined by what I do, but who I am in terms of who I'm in relationship with, who I love, who loves me.
Well, thank you. So let's hone in a little more on the death and grief side. So why is it that with the families that you were working with as a death end-of-life doula, how do they feel about talking about death and grief?
Most families are not comfortable with talking about death and grief. One of the factors I believe is, again, back to the planning. I often say that we plan during a crisis, and that's not the time to plan for a crisis while the crisis is happening. Planning ahead of time gets us more into a place of peace, a place where we can settle down. And going back to what you were talking about as far as identifying, As United States Americans, we are into performing. That comes into our culture at birth. Fake it till you make it, and you are continuing to do that even at the end of life. And that's why our acceptance about death, in my opinion, is often delayed, because we just wait and we wait. And even when someone is on hospice, we're still hoping and we're still waiting for that miracle to happen, instead of processing in our head that this person is here, has been determined that they're going to pass away or die or transition, whatever word you prefer, within 6 months, because that's a requirement for hospice. But we are still hoping and faking and pretending that that person is not going to transition, because we are at this point of not willing to accept that fact that's facing us every day.
Thank you, Val. So how many people here are familiar with hospice? Show of hands. Oh, wow, we've got an educated group. That's great. And you all know that you can graduate from hospice, that sometimes because you're getting that extra TLC, you actually improve a little bit. But for 90% of the people who get into hospice, there is an end-of-life expectancy rather soon, sooner than later. And so to help that process with a family, we now have exponentially grown our numbers of death doulas in this country. I think it went from like 750 to 1,500 to 3,800 or something. Yeah. So do you want to explain a little bit about how death doulas work and how that has helped or encouraged people to get that plan together?
So, from a perspective of a death doula mainly, the purpose is to sit in the gap and just hold that space for a family member without judgment. So, in this particular case with the Amy and her mother, I would sit in that space as a doula and not judge, saying, well, you know your mom believes in God, and you should be believing in God. That's not my role as a end-of-life doula. If I'm invited into this space, I'm supporting both sides of the family. If you are invited in as an end-of-life doula, your primary function is to focus on honoring the person who is dying. Now, there's a lot of family dynamics that happen more than often.
Does that happen?
Yeah, but your space is still to sit and not judge. If you all can still hear me. To not judge, what's going on in the situation, to provide resources around everything that a person may need. I had a particular client who their caregiver was flying back and forth to Hawaii, so his work time was running out because he had used all of his vacation time. So as an end-of-life doula, I've been to Hawaii, but I went and I looked for grief services and therapists for him, and I provided that to him. So you're providing resources, you're sitting in a space that's non-judgmental, you're fully listening to what's going on. And it's difficult because we sit here and say, don't judge, but you have a lot of internal things that you're processing while you're listening to the external things that's coming your way. You're pushing back yourself on what you think, and you're there primarily to support, listen, and provide resources. That's my point of view for what an end-of-life doula does.
I think that's pretty universal. I think that's great. So now you all understand that there's this whole other person you can invite to this end-of-life time. So if you're not comfortable in that space by yourself, and we have a lot of families that we work with where people are afraid to be with somebody as they're dying. Just like people who don't want to be in the birthing room. I was very similar. Same kind of people, actually. It's too visceral. And then there are other organizations. When I was working with the Veterans Hospital, they were working on their initiative of No Veteran Dies Alone. So the idea was to have enough volunteers and staff on board so that somebody would be in the room with the veteran as they were passing, as they were dying. And, I think that's kind of the We talk a lot about good death, what's a good death? And, you know, if we could plan it and then turn a button off, how much happier we'd all be. But that's not the way it happens, so we have to sort of suspend our own beliefs to kind of just go with the flow. We don't know when that's gonna happen. I work with Jane Markley, who was a spearhead in Maryland for getting advanced directives out and to the people and to make it easy to use, and it's an online form called Voice Your Choice or My Directives. And the nice thing about doing an advanced directive in that software app is that it's automatically brought up into any Maryland hospital. So if you go into if you have a crisis and you're admitted to the hospital, voila, there's your advanced directive right there. You don't have to have it in your purse or holler at somebody to go find it in some box in your house. We always recommend you keep it with your file of life, you know, all the medicines you take and who your next of kin is and all that, right on your refrigerator. And if it's not magnetic anymore on your refrigerator, someplace obvious that the EMTs will look. It's super important if you want if you have any chance of having any of your end of life wishes carried out, you have to tell people what they are. And of course, discussing that with your loved ones who are designated as your medical power of attorneys. So we can talk more about that as well. But we also want to think about the language that we use. And obviously in a play, language is super important. Every word is probably vetted 1,000,000 times in your mind, right? So what are the words that you find are familiar to most folks about dying? How does that work in your world?
I don't think it's so much the words as it is the presence. It's about being the empathetic presence. And I think, you mentioned that about the Death Cafe, and I want to just lift that up some more, because having a Death Cafe and having those conversations about death is the way that you develop that vocabulary. I think people don't have a vocabulary for it, partly because they are afraid of it or they're in denial. At the New York Society for Ethical Culture, where I was a clergy leader for many years, we had a Death Cafe. And folks didn't understand what it was. They thought it was very depressing, and we said, no, it's actually very positive. And the people who joined it were often there because they could not have the conversations around death with their children. When they want to say to their children, I'm going to die and I want to prepare everything. No, Mom, no, Dad, that's not going to happen. And so they found the support in that group for having those conversations, to get the directives ready, to put all that together. As a clergy leader, especially after a memorial, I would speak to my congregation and say, do you have a plan? Will you have a meeting with me and tell me what you want your memorial to be? So having the conversations, opening up, offering the invitation for that. One of my members died, and she had put together a plan for her memorial. I can't tell you how relieved her children were that Mom had put this together. They knew what kind of music to have. They knew exactly what she wanted. And so as ethical action, and I often say ethical culture, ethical humanism, it's an ethical act to put this together, to put your survivors' minds at ease. They want to do the right thing. They don't know what the right thing is unless you help them. So I might also just say having a community is so important. And your play brings up something that is not planned. They weren't in a death cafe talking about their deaths or bringing in you as a death doula. This was a shock. This is a complete shock. So I just want to sort of speak to that a little bit, that when you're in a community, when you find a community where you feel accepted and not judged, to be loved and love others, that is such a source of comfort for you. And I just want to briefly tell you about, I'm looking at my daughter, because one of our members of the Brooklyn Society, our home congregation, Lachlan, 17-year-old, killed himself. And so the whole community came together around the family to support them. And Emily and I were there for his green burial. And so we had a common language because we had had those conversations. And so at one point during the service, everyone from that community who had recited these words every Sunday recited the words of the founder Felix Adler: "The dead are not dead if we have loved them truly. In our own lives, we can give them a kind of immortality by taking up the work they have left undone." So I just want to emphasize the importance of community and sharing that language and having a language so that when you do come together, you can say those words together.
Lovely. That's beautiful. Valerie, what do you think about language?
I would like to add on what was said. I'm thinking about two examples, and I may have spoken to Crystal about this. To be successful in getting your people to where they need to be when you transition, you have to consider your own death. We talk about death, but it's okay when we're talking about some other folks' deaths. But then when we have to look in the mirror and say, what is it that I want to do? What's going to happen when I take my last breath? What's going to happen to my home? What are my children going to do? That's hard. It's a knot that forms in your throat and you have to swallow it down. But to normalize this common language that we're talking about, I'll give you an example. My mother passed in 2011, and I started talking to my son about it, my only child. At the time, he was 20, getting ready to go to college. He would sneak out of the room when we were talking. My son is tall, I can't move him. He can lean up beside me and kind of push me to the side, and he would sneak out of the room. I'm like, where's this child? And that was 2011. 2018, December, before COVID. Now, I'm talking to my son saying, this is what I want. You're the only child. You have to do this. I want you to do this. My son came into my home, sat in my dining room, and said, Mom, this is what I want you to do for me if I transition. Totally different than what I was thinking in my head. I would have buried my son. My son wants to be cremated. I would have dishonored. I'm gonna let you sit with that for a minute. I would have dishonored my only child because I didn't take the courage to talk to him for 8 years about what I wanted to do. On the flip side of that, I had a client who I visited her maybe twice a week. Her son visited her every day. And I came in one day and she said, okay, Val, I want us to talk about what I want to wear at the funeral. And I'm like, well, have you talked to such and such? That's her son. She said, yeah, he knows about the funeral and who's going to pick the body up. But I want to talk to you about what I want to wear. And it's back to what Patricia was saying, as far as sometimes you're too close in that connection that you need that middle person to come in and talk on your behalf because you may think that your daughter or your son or that family member can't handle that close connection about death. And so she said, this is what I want to wear. I want to wear this. I want to wear a red suit. And so now I'm the doula. I'm like, okay, do you want gloves? Do you want to wear a hat? You know, these shoes, whatever. And then I contacted the son. And he said, yeah, Val, share with me what my mom wanted. And I told him, I said, Mom wants a suit. She wants a white hat. She wants gloves. He said, Val, I am so glad that my mom shared what she wanted with you and you held that space for her. Because my mom was the usher for our church for 40 years. And my intention was to bury her in her usher uniform because there's nothing else that she will want to wear. No, Mom did not want the usher uniform. So you see how we can hit and miss stuff that's very important at that last hour, that last minute, to honor those that we love, because first of all, we won't face our own death, and then we won't share it with those that we love and we say are our loved ones. If we love them, we have to prepare them, but we have to prepare ourselves first.
Thank you, those are great stories. It reminded me that when I was mentioning My Directive, which is a app, website, whatever, there's, at the end, you start putting in the folks that you want to know about this important piece of paper. But what I didn't realize is that as soon as you hit the, save button, they send that email out to your loved ones. So, of course, I hit the save button, and the next thing I know, my phone is freaking out, and my daughters are calling, and, what's going on? Now they know. But honestly, anybody 18 or older should have an advance directive in place, and it can change. It's a live document that you can change every 6 months, every year, every 2 months, every week if you're at that point in your life. And you can get as touchy-feely as you want about it. I'm always cold, so my kids know, and it's in the advance directive, I want the warm blankets. It's funny little things like that, right? But you have to say it out loud in order for it to happen. And we've had numerous people on Death Cafe who have also said that they were supposed to be the person making the advance directive happen, and the hospitals were not helpful. This is a reality. And I think that's also a nice time to have a death doula to be an advocate for those pieces of the advance directive that may be a little touchy-feely. Maybe the music playlist isn't appropriate for that hospital, but they didn't tell you that. Or maybe you need to put earbuds in your loved one, or have some big, earmuff things to put on them. But it's important to have that advocacy, and just like anybody who goes into a hospital, it's hard to advocate for yourself when you don't feel great already. You're not hearing everything they're saying to you, and it's time to, have somebody else there with you. It's super helpful. So let me just explain just real quickly about Death Cafe. It's an international organization that started in Europe, and I've been running Death Cafe through my neighborhood village for about 5 years. And we did meet initially in person, but COVID hit and we went to Zoom, and we tried to meet again, and it became such a bigger group than just a local, meet at the pub, that we decided to keep it on Zoom. And we get people from all over the world. It's amazing. People call and say, well, it's midnight in London, but I wanted to tune in. I'm like, okay. And we talk about things that are practical. What are your burial plans? Cremation causes a lot of bad chi for our planet. It's one of the global warming no-nos. And actually more animals are cremated than people right now, and that alone is worse than the farts from cows. So, you might want to rethink your own plans. There's now, in the state of Maryland, we've been approved to do aquamations, which is using a water method process, which doesn't hurt the ozone so much. It's a little more expensive now because it's new, but we feel like it's going to really hit big time. And despite religious beliefs, many more Americans are being cremated than not. So 85%, we're up to 85%. Yeah, it's a big number. So it's also, again, something to think about, is maybe shifting from that cremation to green burial, as Anne mentioned. Lots of different options out there. We're trying to get more space available in Maryland to bury people naturally. And, those are choices that people have to just sort of talk about. So aquamation uses a base. I'm not a scientist, so didn't do science classes very often, but as I understand it, it uses a base that dissolves the body parts in water at a high temperature. And what's left is ash. kind of bizarre. And green burials can be kind of there's a big range in that, but mostly it means that you're not using any embalming, that you're could or could not be in a coffin, but there's no cement around the coffin. What else, green burial wise? What am I missing?
It's more natural material. So in the case of Lachlan, his parents had him in a basket.
Right.
So knowing that not only would his body return to the earth, but there were no materials put in the grave that would last. That it would break down naturally.
Often they pick a tree also to plant over where the body is decomposed.
Right. Right. Lots of options there, yeah.
On the aquamation, if you're still using high heat, how does that differ from cremation, do you know?
Well, there's no fire. I think the water could be warmed by solar, it could be warmed, I'm not exactly sure of the science.
Thank you. Never heard of it.
It is in a vat. The body is in a vat with water and this base that dissolves the bones in that. Right, there's no smoke going off into the world. So kind of interesting stuff, and it's wonderful that we have so many options now. So, it's worth digging into. So I wanted to mention, no pun intended, thanks Carol. Sorry, it's a family treat. So not only do I lead a death cafe, but I also am now leading what's called Death Over Drafts. Another good pun. And so we meet in a brewery, and we drink, and we talk about death. And it's a very lively conversation.
I'm sure.
We're actually celebrating somebody's birthday this next week. They said, oh yeah, it's my birthday, I'm coming to celebrate it, Death Over Drafts. Like, okay, I'll bring a cupcake. And then I'm hosting a death doula party next Wednesday at Hope Connections for Cancer Support. Cancer Support in Bethesda. So if you work in the field of end of life and you'd like to come to the Death Doula Tea Party, there's a poster out there on the table. So let's get back to our experts here, because they've got lots more things to tell us.
If you don't mind, I'd like to address what you have in your play about how people deal with a death and how they respond to it. And I think it's something, for all of us, to how do we respond? You had perfect examples of what not to say. And, it's, even if you, believe those things, even if you, for the sake of your own comfort, that you believe that someone has passed or transitioned, or however you want to put, or is with the angels, and God has called her to be with him. I've heard all those things, and even if you believe those things, I think we need to really hear how that sounds to a grieving parent. God took my child away to be with him in the cloud. It just hits and hits and hits every time somebody hears that. I just thought you put that so beautifully. The character that responded, I think, most empathetically and most compassionately in your play was Franny. I just loved the way you wrote that character, because first of all, she responded with empathy. I'm so sorry. Then she used I statements about her own experience, with her cat, and then with her father, whom she probably doesn't remember a lot about. I just thought that was beautifully written and in stark contrast to what other characters were saying. And I think, the humanistic perspective in this is that some people, and again, maybe out of fear, but also I don't know what to say, but I must say something. Which is why when you ask me about words, sometimes no words is the best way. So I think some people will go back on the way they were raised with their tradition, and they'll say these platitudes and not realizing how they hit so hard to someone who's lost someone. And so, silence is golden. Your play, be still, to be still. Silence is such a gift when we hear chatter all around us all the time. And so I think, that notion of just sitting with somebody, and it's hard for people to be quiet. So the gift of just sitting with somebody, may I sit with you? May I be here with you? And asking permission, and not just giving it and pushing it on someone. Because you're in such shock when death happens suddenly. It's a gift to be able to plan your own death. It's a gift to be in a death cafe and to have those conversations. But the tragedy of an unexpected death, how many blows can you take?
We make plans and God laughs, is that the phrase? And also asking them what they want. Exactly. How can I help you? Is there anything I can do for you right now? And they might say, what I really need is somebody to go pay my electric bill. I'm really worried about my bills getting paid and I can't focus on that. Or I'm really worried about, whatever is on their mind. What do you find, Val?
I heard someone say that they took their dog on a very long walk before they came here today, sitting on this side of the room. They just may need you to walk their dog. Mm-hmm. And you would be surprised if we sat here for 1 minute in silence, we would communicate with each other without saying a word. There's so much. I've supported a dementia person a couple of months ago. There's so much that can be communicated by silence, just by sitting still. But we're so multitask. That goes back to the high performance of the United States folks. We can't sit still. We have to have now we have to have the iPad or the phone. We're in a movie theater and we got to be told to turn the phone off. And you're in a movie theater, you paid to see a movie, but you have to be told to turn off your phone. I don't understand that. Yeah. So just sitting in quietness and also recalling and reflecting back the words that you hear that they are saying to you. For me, if someone is saying past, then I say past. If someone is saying death, then I say death. I try to assess where they are as far as their level of comfortability to be able to talk about death. So recalling, reflecting, sitting in silence and listening. If you put all those skills and tools together, you're honoring that person.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's really become apparent are things like aromatherapy, music. You talked about favorite music, touch. Is it okay to hold somebody's hand, or is that not okay? Is it okay to give them a little hand massage to ease some of the discomfort? So powerful to do that kind of work. I've brought in folks who are Reiki masters who've been able to really open up the channels, if you will, to a more relaxing time at end of life. So lots of possibilities, and you just kind of have to know to ask and to have that be part of what's in your plan. So if you have, alternative healers in your life, acupuncturists, Reiki masters, massage therapists, you can put them in your advance directive and say to your designated plan administrator, consult these people. They know what my body likes. That could be part of your plan as well. So let's talk a little bit about ritual. They got to it at the end, that they realized church and religion and ritual may be 3 different things. So what is it that you're seeing in terms of people's preferences for ritual in the world that you're in?
Well, first of all, I grew up Catholic, so there was a set way that you did things, and you had to do it that way. So as a humanist clergy, I meet with the family and I ask them, what's most important to you? A lot of it is the listening. You're listening, and I'll say, if I don't know someone, I'll say, I've never met your relative, or whatever, your father, your mother. Tell me stories. So it's a process. It's a process of sitting with the family asking them to tell the stories. Tell me all the stories, tell me what you value, tell me what this person valued, what's important to you, how can we create a ceremony that works for you. Now, I do, part of my process is that I also will give families a draft, a memorial service draft. Because I think, and I'll say to them, you might find something in here that works for you, you might not, it's okay to throw it away and start from scratch, but this would give you an idea, because so often, people don't know where to start. And if the person who's died has not given them any idea, and has left them, and they're terrified of doing the wrong thing. So very often, just giving them that draft allows them to relax a little bit. Okay, I can deal with a draft. I can deal with going through this. I like this, I don't like that. And then who do you want to include? Do you want different people to have speaking roles? Who would you like to speak?
No, we're having words, but you keep going, sorry.
Okay. So a lot of it is just sort of that process, the sitting down and meeting and listening. What feels best to me at the end of a service that I've officiated is when I have somebody say to me afterwards, wow, how long did you know Joe?
Oh.
And I'll say, you know, I never had the honor of meeting Joe, but I learned so much about him from his family that I'm so glad that I was able to make him present for you here today. So I think it's a process over the course of days. You don't do it right away. Listening.
One of the gifts, COVID just keeps giving, right? One of the gifts of COVID is that a lot of families had to do that story sharing over Zoom, and some clever person on the Zoom recorded it. So not only did they have the stories being buffered by whoever was doing the clergy piece, but they also had the stories from each other. And that's actually the beginning of the ritual, from my perspective, is this story sharing. It's one of my favorite parts of, once somebody's died and the family gets together. Whether they're challenged in the family dynamics or whether it's smooth sailing, it's always fun to hear each person's perspective of their relationship with this loved one. So, Val, go ahead. What's the ritual side of your world?
Well, understanding that everyone doesn't want a ritual. Rituals are definitely connected to culture and religion, and acceptance of a person saying, no, I don't do that, I don't believe in rituals, I'm not gonna do it, and that's fine. My ritual is I wear my mom's ring when I'm speaking, so this is my ritual that I do for myself. We encourage that there's some type of closing ritual, even if it's not with the family. If a doula is supporting the family, we are to step back at the end of supporting that individual and that family and do our own ritual to cleanse ourselves in order to be able to be prepared for serving the next client. So you don't want to carry over things. You want to have some type of closure. When I was thinking about the dynamics that was going on in the play here, we also think from a perspective that your truth and my truth can coexist. We don't have to be in a space of like mind. It's okay if you're different, your thoughts are different than my thoughts. We help each other grow in that space. Always having a person saying yes, yes, yes to you is not causing you to grow. You need someone to get in there and shake you up. And that's part of this play. No, I don't agree with what you're saying. But again, having a conversation, and maybe, when we have conversations, we do the 365, we skip over the gray area. We go completely to do it my way or don't do it at all. And we're not supporting each other in that way. Find a common ground where we can coexist within each other while I'm respecting your belief, your rituals, and you're respecting my beliefs and my rituals also. So two truths can coexist at the same time. Doesn't have to be separated at all.
It's beautiful. It just dawned on me that the last time I was in this actual space was for a memorial service. And I'm hearing you say that, for some reason it came right back to me. And sometimes ritual can be like you said, having moment of silence. It can be different people sharing stories at an event. It can be a concert. It can be a wine tasting. I mean, whatever.
Lighting a candle.
Lighting a candle. Right?
Meditation, yeah.
It can also be doing the electric slide.
Yeah.
There's one memorial I did, she was a party girl, and they wanted to really celebrate her being a party girl. So at the end of the more formal ritual, we had agreed those who were able would stand, push the chairs to the side, put on the music, and we would do the electric slide.
That's great. That's great. So let's take a few more questions from the audience. Yes.
I have one question. Thank you for this. I volunteer at a senior living community nearby, being around with a lot of older people. This one guy lost his wife this past spring, sort of unexpectedly. And I don't live there, so I don't have an opportunity to just go sit with him and be there. But I run into him periodically, and every time I see him, I'll say, "How are you doing today?" And he'll, with tears in his eyes, and he'll say, "I miss her so much. I miss her so much." And I will say, "I'm so sorry. I'm sure you do. She was a wonderful person." And then I don't know what else to say. Is there anything? I don't want to make him sadder, but I wish I could say something of comfort. And I really don't know.
One thing that occurred to me as I was listening to you, and it depends upon your relationship or your friendship with him, but one thing that I think I might do in that case is say, I would really like to hear a story about your life right now. Would you feel comfortable telling me something about her? Because I think he's carrying her with him. Yeah. And maybe he's afraid that people are bored and they don't want to hear anymore. So an invitation to talk about her might be a real gift.
Thank you.
And also asking him if there's anything else you could help with. And depending on what your range of help looks like, you can figure that out for him. Maybe just getting together once in a while to share a story and a cup of tea.
Thank you both. Appreciate it.
Sure. Any other thoughts? Ritual, language? Yes, Nicole.
I have one. I think it's wonderful when we can borrow from different traditions. None of these are patented. So if there's something in the Catholic tradition that you think is just great, burning incense or something, then we can borrow it. And I'm Jewish, and I really love a lot of the rituals. I found them to be very comforting. And especially Shiva, which means 7, and for those of you who've never been to one, it's like a home gathering morning, and traditionally it was 7 days. Most people do 1, 2, or 3 now. And when my late husband died, we did one in person. It was a moment in the pandemic when we could gather, and then we did one on Zoom, and it was so moving to me. The people that came to the Zoom, it was moving when people that came in person, but the people that came to the Zoom one, some of them were far away, and they took the time to come. Some of them were close by, so they could have come to the in-person, but maybe they didn't feel comfortable doing that, so some of his old employees came and they told these stories about his kindnesses at work, and it will always stay with me. It was really comforting, kind of like a blanket. I really felt my community around it, so I just wanted to say, use it. Just Google Shiva, S-H-I-V-A, and if it's not your tradition, if there's something in it that's useful, that we can share all our traditions.
I think that's a great idea. We should have like we used to tease about having a Shiva R Us. Remember Toys R Us?
Yeah.
Because there's certain equipment you're supposed to have and all this and that, but you can take it, if nothing else about the Jewish tradition, you can take it any way that you believe it's comforting to you. And I remember at my dad's Shiva, which was at my house, I had a labyrinth in the backyard, and I invited people to walk the labyrinth and think of stories and then come back in and tell us the stories. And 3 or 4 months later, I had a lounge chair in the middle of the labyrinth so you could like sit there and hang out. 3 or 4 months later, I was putting the lounge chair away for the winter, and tucked underneath was this plastic bag, and my girlfriends had all written me little notes inside. So it's a new tradition. It was so sweet. So that was very precious to me. And letting people know what they can do for your family and in a time of challenge like this, you know, they were great. They just came in, swooped in, did laundry, they did dishes, they, you know, got somebody to mow the lawn because people were going to be coming. I mean, those kinds of things you just don't even want to be thinking about. So anytime you can ask, and then people can choose what they're comfortable with. Anybody else? Yeah.
So one challenge that was sort of introduced but not shown is how to talk to children about
Reading
death.
my mind.
and added a child about a child's death. So.
Although I thought they did that really well. I thought Crystal wrote that really well. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, well, that's my daughter, so as I said, you're reading my mind, sweetheart. Yeah, absolutely, and I think, you know, there's age-appropriate language. You know, what do we say to a child at different times? And children ask us a whole lot of questions, and one mistake I made, well, one of the many mistakes I made as a parent, when my children would ask me a question, I'd give them like a long-winded answer. And they don't want that often. So, you know, like cut it, you know, keep it short. But there's different age-appropriate times to talk about death. But I think it's important to always have it as a conversation so that your children develop a vocabulary for it. And also talk about your own deaths. And I just want to give you an example from my family. My husband's parents always told their 3 sons, when we die, if we die when you are young, here are the people we have designated as your guardians, so that you will be taken care of. And when he told this story, my sister started crying, and she said, we never had that conversation, and because so my husband is Jewish, we were raised Catholic, my sister assumed that if my parents died while we were young, that we would be, the 4 of us would be separated and would have to live with our what are they called now?
Godparents.
Thank you, our godparents. I can't even say God. I thought godparents. And she was terrified, and this would keep her up some nights. And especially because my godparents were great, hers were terrible. So not only would she be separated from her siblings, but she'd have to live with this horrible aunt and uncle. So I think it's a responsibility of parents to talk about it, to develop the vocabulary, and you know, because children are going to be scared, and they're going to imagine your deaths, even if you don't imagine your own. And so I think, you know, you can get support for that, you know, in parenting workshops and stuff. But listen to your kids, listen to what they need from you. They don't need a lecture. They need some reassurance and some comforting. One comforting thing that I found, and it's from Ralph Waldo Emerson, whom we love as a humanist philosopher, although he probably didn't call himself a humanist. We are such stuff as stars are made of. Literally, you had some of that in your play in terms of there's energy, and the energy gets recycled in different forms. So one parent, Dale McGowan, who wrote a book, Parenting Beyond Belief, includes in his conversation that he had with his daughter, and he said, can you imagine where you were before you were born? And so I'm having those conversations, you know, where, like, what happens to me when I die? Well, gee, do you think about where you were before you were born? And just kind of get a creative, imaginative conversation that's not scary.
Can I
Yeah,
just add?
please.
So, you know, children don't have that fear instilled in them. They go out, they get on a roller coaster now. I wouldn't even get on the roller coaster that I got on when I was 12. They're just flexible, curious. And so I come from the point of, you know, all of us go get the goldfish, right? And that goldfish dies, and it's turned upside down. That's the perfect time. The hamster that's running around and you wake up and that's the perfect time. The cat, the puppy, have a ceremony, plan a ceremony, have the family come in, do a ritual, light a candle, have a program, share stories about the cat, the fun days, the name of the fish. Start normalizing it at that point and just continue on. When grandma, grandpa, auntie, uncle, every opportunity. Doesn't have to be a 30-minute conversation, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And just continue to normalize the conversation, even if it takes 8 years.
Go ahead.
Yes, I have a question for you. I appreciated what you said about you join a family or a group and you help them through a time. They go through their own ritual and you go through your rituals.
Yes.
For that. I wonder what you would tell us about that when we find ourselves in that situation. When we're leaving, like we're with a friend or a group, and we're very involved in that time, and then that's over. And how do we what advice you would give us in terms of rituals for ourselves to say goodbye or to step away?
So I was speaking at a church one time and I had a caregiver, and I'll bring it together, that took care of her mom for years, and at 6:30, she didn't know what to do because 6:30 she was there with her mom all the time. So when her mom passed away, she just did not know how to regain herself. Part of a ritual is getting back into the community. What was you doing before you took care of this person? Because caregivers lose themselves because they're on the back burner, their self-care is on the back burner, they're not eating right, they're not sleeping right, focus is on that person, target focus. So what were you doing before you got into that situation? Did you golf? Did you fish? Did you dance? What was it that you did to support yourself before you got into the situation? Go back and redefine that. Sit with yourself for a minute before you get into that space. Breathe through what you need to breathe through, because you have to go through the healing process in order to be able to move forward. If you skip over the healing process, it's going to keep coming back for you, especially if there's another loss, whether it's a job, divorce, child, marriage, whatever. If you don't take care of that healing from that loss, it's going to continue to pile up for you. So get back to what you were doing before, but take some time for yourself to just have some downtime and breathe through, and then come up with a plan for yourself. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate in particular the getting back into your routine.
Yes.
But actually taking that moment as you do that.
So some rituals include, I'll be right with you, some,
We probably have to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're almost at the end
Okay.
of our time.
so some rituals include a daily practice once someone is passed that you're close to. I call it a daily art dose. And give yourself permission to journal or pray or whatever works for you. It might be a ritual cup of tea, it might be a walk in the woods, it could be something very simple, but you might need 30 days to process. You might need 365 days to process. So we had one more question.
Thank you for all of this. One thing I wanted to comment on that I thought that you touched in play, but you could go further perhaps, which is,
Louder, please.
okay, sorry.
Take a big breath.
Yeah. The question of guilt and blame. Two things that are common in a lot of relationships, but have an incredible impact on this long-term relationship. And I just wonder if you finding different ways to handle that.
Who are you addressing the question to? These ladies?
Well, actually to you.
Oh.
But you don't have to be put on the spot either.
Yeah. I mean.
Sounds like a good conversation to have
Yeah, oh, no.
I can get another time.
Okay, very quickly.
Okay.
One of the scenes did address the blame with the couple, and I'll just add that I understand statistically that when parents lose a child, that them staying together is statistically very unlikely.
It's a 50-50.
And so I intentionally wanted that to not be the case with this couple. I wanted them to survive this. And so, yes, they definitely each, all of the adults involved felt some guilt and wanted to self-blame while not blaming anyone else. And so they had to struggle to work through that with me. No, I appreciate you saying that. There's a whole lot of layers that I tried to move through, and with different kinds of grief as well, and different ways of dealing with that. Everyone in that, every single person in the play had lost someone at some point. So, yeah, thank you.
So I want to thank Nicole for inviting me and these wonderful women who I get to chat with. It's just been an honor and a privilege. I also want to mention that Capital Caring Hospice provides a free service by volunteers to do bears made of children's clothes. So if a family wants to have a little bear made when a child passes, I thought that was really interesting. Sometimes they make memory quilts. I think we've all heard about that. But if you ever want to volunteer with the hospice, they're always looking for volunteers, and it's super meaningful work. If anybody's ever done that, it's really beautiful work. Doesn't necessarily mean you'll be with someone at end of life, but you might be able to help them through the parts before that. All right, so thank you all very much.